ጤና ይስጥልኝ የተከበራችሁ ተመልካቾቻችን፣ ይህ በዲያስፖራ ቴሌቪዥን የተዘጋጀ የሚቀርብላችሁ የጌራ ሾው ፕሮግራም ነው። ዛሬ ከሁሉ አስቀድሜ በመላው ዓለም ለምትገኙ እናቶች ሁሉ መልካም የእናቶች ቀን እንዲሆንላችሁ ከልብ እየተመኘሁኝ የሚቀጥለው ፕሮግራሜ የጋበዝኩት እንግዳዬ ከላይቤሪያ አፍሪካ ነው እና ፕሮግራማችን የሚሆነው በእንግሊዝኛ ነው። አብራችሁ እንድትቆዩ በአክብሮት ጋብዛለሁ። Good evening. Happy Mother's Day to all the wonderful mothers all over the world. Thank you for watching the Gera-show live program. Recently, as the news has spread, the anger between China and Africa has grown, and it would now appear that the ChinaAfrica relationship is entering an uncertain chapter. In some respects, good may come out of it. A sober reassessment of this relationship by African officials stripped off the win-win rhetoric Beijing often thought will be necessary for African states to achieve better partnership on more even footing. However, there's still a serious reason to worry. With the livelihood of Africans abroad under siege, the situation at home is a little better, requiring ambitious multilateral assistance. A deterioration of Africa's relationship with its largest trading partner and the official creditor will serve no one's interests, neither those of the Africans nor those of the Chinese. Recent China's actions are coming at a sensitive time as African nations seek debt relief due to the pandemic, especially from China, one of Africa's largest lender and the country where the coronavirus outbreak began. This sudden and sweeping move was consistent with China's response to the coronavirus, but it was propelled by a troubling logic that targeted people based on race rather than their contact history. China's domestic treatment of Africans is now raising calls for rethink of China-Africa relationships in so many African debtor countries. What African nations can do to overcome this conflict. My next guest is the founder of MacDella Cooper Foundation, ambassador, and a former presidential candidate of Liberia, Ms. MacDella Cooper. Ms. Ambassador, thank you for accepting my invitation to the Gera-show in such a short notice. When Ms. Binta Berer, the founder of PLAD, who has also been on the Gera-show, briefed me on this growing Africa Forwards movement, and I was very much impressed. She gave me your contact, and I suggested I reach out to you. Again, thanks for being on the Gera-show live.
Hosting me.
Okay. Before we get to our points, let me ask you this. How the current situation looks like in Liberia in regard to COVID-19?
Well, it's like any other country where the government has put in a lockdown, meaning the entire country is on a lockdown, and we are confined to our homes, and there's very, very limited movement around. We stay within our communities, and so everything looks good so far. The numbers are low. I don't want to brag about it, but right now we are at about 11 deaths and probably about 70 people who have contracted the virus, and so I guess we're doing okay so far, so good.
Okay, that's very good. Okay, Ms. Ambassador, tell us about this movement to demonstrate against the Chinese brutality and dehumanizing of Africans in China came about.
Well, there have been series of conversations had with several concerns, African Africans around the continent and other parts of the world after receiving these images. For me as an activist, I became very concerned. And so when I received a call from some of my colleagues and family members included, to take a look at this and take a look at the human rights violation that was happening in China, not necessarily against Chinese, but against Africans. And so we got together, we want to create a committee to have a conversation around what was happening and what can we do as concerned Africans to speak up about this, because this is not something that should be happening to anyone, especially our own people. And so we agreed to do something. And so this is how the Africa Forward sort of concept came along.
So you basically confused, this is necessary now in Africa. There have been other brutalities against Africans. Some are currently ongoing against, for example, Ethiopians in Saudi Arabia and other countries. And why take on China? What's the difference right now?
Well, this is a very good question, and I think it's a question that we should always be asking. The idea of China came to us because we have access to social media, and I think China has somehow relaxed their laws on WhatsApp, and so a lot of videos came out, and these videos went viral. I can't really test the fact that I've received a video from Saudi Arabia, what's happening to Ethiopians there, so maybe it hasn't really been put on my radar. But if that was put on my radar, I would take the same action as we are taking against China right now. And so, yes, any African or across the world that are being dehumanized and maltreated, we need to speak up about it. We need to galvanize and do something quickly about it. So this is something that people are not accustomed to doing. The days for those things are over. And so I think once we have an organized group that are watching wherever these atrocities are happening or being inflicted on our people, we have to take action right away.
So do you believe that the world will pay attention or give a fit to Africans demonstrating to restore their Trump dignity and humanity? The words saw on the social media taking place in China?
Well, we will have to make demands. We will have to plead. We will have to negotiate. And we're going to pay keen attention to those who are not, paying attention. And what I mean by that is we're going to talk to our leaders first. We're going to talk to the AU. We're going to talk to Africans across the world, and let's do this for us. We don't have to wait for the Western world to come to rescue us before we rescue ourselves and our brothers and sisters who are out there. This is something that Africans must take control over, and Africans must put fire behind, and Africans must put energy behind. So if the world doesn't pay attention to us, we are going to pay attention to ourselves. So we're not here waiting for approval from outsiders, because I know they have their own problems and their own citizens who are going through some level of problems or atrocities that they have to deal with. So we are dealing with an African problem, and Africans are going to take on the responsibility to find a solution to those problems. So whether they pay attention or not, we're not waiting for approval from anyone. We're going to move forward with this.
What it looks like currently, regarding this movement, African nations are supporting it, and where are you particularly right now?
To speak the truth, we have to understand that there have been a lot of partnerships built between the Chinese government and African nations and African leaders. We just had we had the Africa China summit that happens every year, where our leaders go there and whatever benefits they bring back, we hear about some of it and we don't hear about some of it. So we don't know who's tied to China, who. So I know some of our leaders will be a little reluctant to fight for these what they consider few citizens that find themselves in harm's ways compared to the sort of contribution they're getting from the Chinese government. And so we're optimistic. We're not sort of thinking that every leader is going to jump on the bandwagon and support us. So we know there'll be some sort of reluctancy for leaders to come on board to support this initiative. And so it's not whether or not we're still going to plead with our leaders to speak through the AU, to speak to China. And we are still researching. We don't suppose that this is something that's organized by the Chinese government. So we're saying individual citizens of China inflicting maltreatment or dehumanizing our citizens. So we're not accusing the Chinese government here. We are saying that there are a handful of individual citizens or groups within China that are dehumanizing and maltreating, ill-treating our citizens, and we want their government to look into it, just as we want our governments to talk to the Chinese government and let them know that these things are happening.
This whole thing will be resolved, do you think, anytime soon?
Well, we're on a lockdown, so we can't really do much besides going digital with this digital, and perhaps putting in some phone calls and having these conferences across the world, and also calls with our leaders, because we can't really go in to see our leaders and speak to them face to face due to the lockdown, due to the inability to travel. And so we hope that it will be something that we can resolve before the lockdown is over. Because once the lockdown is over and we have not come to a conclusion, then we're going to have to take, actions. Meaning, I know you talked about demonstration earlier. Those things will happen. There'll be massive protests across the continent to speak to the Chinese and let them know that we're serious about this. We will not allow Africans in any country, whether it's China, whether it's Europe, whether it's the United States, to be maltreated and we sit back and just watch and do nothing. Those days are over.
To your knowledge, has Chinese authorities even apologized for the way they're treated Africans in China?
That I'm aware of, no. I'm not aware of any apology that has come from China, whether the government or the individual groups or the individuals who are inflicting these sort of atrocities on our people. We have not. I'm not aware of any apologies that have come forward.
After the lockdown is over, so what do we expect about this movement in particular, beside talking to the African leaders?
We're going to we're planning. We are not through our planning yet, and as a matter of fact, we are still in conversation with Africans and in important positions across the world. So you will hear a lot of voices coming out. Not just we're starting from here, but from here we will have a slew of voices coming out at this issue, because similar thing we did in Sudan when I'm sorry, not Sudan, but Libya, when the modern slavery was at its peak in Libya. We spoke up, and so you'll hear Friends of Africa, you'll hear Africans and people of African descent coming out to speak up as well. So with all of those collective voices, I think we'll make enough noise where leaders will have to pay attention to this. The media entity, which is we're hoping that will carry the message for us as well, because when one person is human rights is violated, it leaves a floodgate open for journalists to be attacked, for women to be attacked, for the youth to be attacked, people living with physical disability or orientation to be attacked. So this is something that if we let it go, we should just be prepared that it could happen to anyone, not just Africans anymore. So.
Yeah, the current situation is basically, made the Africa-China relationship uncertain, and so this movement is just started because of all these human violations, you believe, or in the future, you guys will be able to revise the entire African-China deal, basically, what's to be revised and address it again, all the deals that China is making in Africa?
The deals are oftentimes made between governments, and so citizens are not part of those deals. We don't necessarily; those deals are not published. They're not made public, so the public really don't have much saying in what deals our governments are signing with the Chinese government. They come with these massive offers. They come with these sweet deals, and our governments, of course, they're in need of the cash, they're in need of what the resources the deal brings to the table. And so governments will go ahead and they're not part of the negotiation. They're not part of the understanding of what you only hear about it later on. You hear it through the Ministry of Finance. You hear about it through the president's website or the head of state's websites, and so by that time the deal is already signed, sealed, and done with. And so of course our leaders, like I said, will always try to be diplomatic with the other government, and so we don't have the power to, what do I mean? We don't have the power to influence what our governments are doing on a large scale. But we are the ones electing our leaders into office. And this is where the citizens' power will speak, because any leader who has been democratically elected into office are made aware that their citizens from their respective countries are in China and being abused. Their human rights is being violated, and these leaders don't do anything about it. We're going to mark those leaders, of course, and we will make sure they're not elected into office. That's a long process, because leaders are elected for anywhere between 4 to 7 years across the continent, depending on the nation. And so, but we want to speak to our leaders, and we are hopeful that our leaders will listen to the cries of their people who elected them into power. Because those are the sons and daughters of people who went to the polls to elect them. And so, if they're not heeding to the cry of the people after these massive protests, potential protests, happens, if the leaders, our leaders, don't talk to China, don't speak to China, and ask China to probably put in some arrest of those individuals who are inflicting these atrocities on our people, then we will see that our governments don't care about its citizens, and so they should be prepared that the citizens will not vote them back into power. That's just one side of the coin, and there are multitudes of sides of this coin. So it just depends on the vantage point. So we want our leaders to not have to go that route. We want our leaders to understand what appeal we're making to them today and take action for the citizens of their country.
So, in your thought, most of the deals that were made before was not discussed properly in any of African nations' parliaments. Is that right?
Well, yes, we do have our representatives in parliament, but again, it's oftentimes the representatives in the parliament or in the House of Senate and lower house, they have conversation, but the average Joe from the street really are not necessarily. They're represented by the parliament, the representatives and the senators and what have you. But it's listen. A leader goes into power. A leader make decision, oftentimes not on behalf of the citizens. So there's still that gap, and we have to be aware of that. So the deals are oftentimes it depends on what's happening, what mindset those parliamentary members are, what mindset they're going into these deals with, whether they represent their people or not. It's not the people who are making the decision at the end of the day. So if you have a representative sent to parliament, they are not necessarily talking to their constituents. They're not talking to the folks who elected them into office, saying what, to get their full opinion on how these deals are coming into these communities and how will it affect. Because you see the Chinese government sending a lot of folks out here to do work, and oftentimes we just see them. I'm on the ground here. We see them working, and most of the time we have no idea they were coming. We have no idea what they're doing. Everything is done in secret. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that the average Joe on the streets are aware of some of these deals. I know they're represented. They send representation to Parliament to represent them, but I don't know how much conversation is being brought back to the communities.
Uh, let me ask you this about this movement. All this happens in China when most African countries was trying to negotiate their debts with China because of the current situation, what was going on in the world. So, what do you think about this movement as not contradicting on that, and all that whole thing will give China power again over Africa?
Any nation should have or will have power over Africa. I think there are two different things we're looking at. There is a debt that's owed, and that's between the governments that negotiate those deals. And so, you know, in terms of China having power over Africa, I I'm yet to see what sort of power they will have over Africa. We're a whole continent. China is a country. Of course, we have the same numbers in terms of population. You know, a country having the same numbers as an entire continent, 1.3, 1.2 billion people. But they're still government to government. China cannot just take control of the entire Africa because they have to deal with several governments. I don't think every government owes the same amount to China. So, whatever deal the Chinese government individually or negotiate with the individual African countries, I don't think will have anything to do with the entire continent itself.
Okay, great. I know, Miss Ambassador, it's too late where you are right now, and due to the time limitation that I have, we are about to wrap up our program. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you, when did you go back to Africa? I know you are living here in the United States, and also, what motivates you to go back there?
Well, yes, I was a refugee. Escaped. I sort of went to exile after the war in my country, or during the war in my country. I went to exile in the Ivory Coast, and I was lucky enough to have gotten an immigration visa to go study in America.
Okay.
And so I spent a few years studying. After my studies, I went to corporate America, worked there for a few years. But the war was still happening in my country. And so, as a young African woman living in New York, enjoying the privilege of New York, having my own level of success, I constantly thought about my continent, thought about my country, what was happening in my country. And I was an African woman. I wasn't an American woman. As much as I was appreciative of America's sort of kind goodwill towards me, I knew I was never going to be an American. I was always going to be an African woman, and I needed to serve and live on my continent and in my country. And so it was only a matter of time. I worked, I made some resources, and I came back home to serve my community. And so I did. I started a foundation back in 2003 to serve Liberia, to offer to the people who are coming out of the Civil War access to some resources: education, healthcare, affordable housing, nutrition, food security. And so I did that for orphans and women and the youth groups that I would work with. So that was my calling in life. My calling was never to be a big shot in America and enjoy the privilege of America while my country was going through its own series of issues. And I knew I needed to be back here. So I came back home gladly in 2005, and I've been living here off and on since.
Oh, that was really good. You run for the public office, and what would that experience look like? And are you going to run again?
Well, I ran, after years of being a philanthropist and an activist, fighting for children, women rights, protection of children, and trying to get women rights within their own countries, and youth, empowering the youth. It was just a matter of time before I went to policy making. I wanted to influence policies, to put the right policies in place. So the work I was doing as a humanitarian was something that government should be doing for the people. It wasn't an individual responsibility. My charity was only offering a band-aid solution, temporary solution to a problem that we needed to eventually fix. I want to see all children in school. I want to see women participating, fully participating, because when we call ourselves a democratic nation, and democracy is never democracy except there's equality. We were leaving too many women out of the equation, too many young people out of the equation, people living with physical disability and orientation out of the equation. And we can only be as powerful as a nation if we brought all of our best to the table to be a part of the decision-making body. And so I ran for office for that very reason, to bring women's voices to the table, to say we need to look at, bringing everyone to the table so that we can walk on our 2 feet and not one. because I strongly believe that if we just leave democracy in the hands of the men, that's lopsided democracy, as I call it. So we need to have a woman on the table. We need to have young people. We need to have the youth. We need to have people living with physical disability. And so I ran. It was a great experience. I came into a space. I was the only woman amongst 19 men running for the top office in the country, and I did very well. It was my first time being in a political space. I came number 7, which was surprising to a lot of people. They thought, who is this young woman? She's from New York. She thinks she has a shot at this thing. Um, but I would say this much: out of 19 people, I came number 7. That means I beat a lot of senators who had been in the Senate for many years, who had been in politics for many years. Because at the end of the day, it's really about the people. It's about the issues. It's about a new Africa. It's about a new Liberia. Not the We can't continue to do the same thing and expect different results. So I will run again.
Oh, you
I
will? Uh-huh. When is the next election in Liberia now?
Well, there are a series of elections coming up.
Okay.
We have a midterm elections, and I just started a political party, which is the first political party in this country that gives women and those groups I mentioned equal footing with men on the decision-making table. And it's not women trying to be men. It's just saying that we do have a voice that we can add to development, that we can add to the economy, that we can add to social development. So we want women at the table. It's not right that you have political parties and it's a boys' club. Women are put in a separate wing called the women's wing, and youth are put in a separate area called the youth wing. We no longer want to see those things happening. We want everyone at the decision-making table. And so my party now is pushing candidates for the midterm election, which is happening in October of this year, 2020. I will not be participating in the senatorial election, but I will be pushing the right candidates that will push an agenda that covers all citizens of Liberia, so that we have an inclusive democracy and not a lopsided democracy where only men are making the decisions. So the next presidential election is 2023, and I
It's
look
around the
forward
corner.
to. It's right around the corner. Yes, that's right.
Wow, excellent, excellent. So, Miss Ambassador, thank you so much. And by the way, it's a Mother's Day, and happy Mother's Day. And if you
Thank
want to
you.
say any words for those wonderful moms out there, in Africa or all over the world, we would like to give you that chance and wrap up our program for tonight.
Sure. It's I want to say happy Mother's Day to all of the mothers and even those fathers who have to be mothers to their children. Africa is such a unique continent. We raise children whether they're ours or not. And I also want to say happy Mother's Day to those women who are raising children who are not their own children. It's not an easy task, but it is a burden that we have to carry as African women. And so I want to just say thank you for all you do. Thank you for all you do for your nation, for your community, your nation, your continent. I pray that God will grant you more grace to continue to raise our children, because like the old fashioned or the old folks used to say, it takes a village to raise a child. We can no longer leave our children behind and expect a decent adult out of them. We have got to move our children forward. We have to raise them, even though they are not ours. We have to continue raising them. We are raising Africa together.
That's great. Thank you so much, Ms. Ambassador, and I hope I will have you back on the Gera-show to discuss more about the current movement you started it. We're all with you, and I wish you on that. And please stay well and take care of yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Same
Thank
to
you.
you.
Thank you again for being on the Gera-show, Ms. Ambassador.
Yes, thank you.